So let's look briefly at this two-founder, two-head temple situation, which feels a little weird. So within Sotoshu, of course, there are several kinds of temples. There are the two main temples, Eheiji and Sojiji, which we'll talk about. Then there are the training temples, where the clergy, the novices go to learn to be clergy. That is the whole point of those things. They are not your local temple, because another kind of temple is sort of your local temple, which is like your neighborhood church. So that's where your local parishioners, if you will, right, are meeting and getting their spiritual needs met and doing that sort of thing. So a training temple and a local temple do not look the same. If you go to a local temple, you will not see zazen every morning, classes, intensive classes and things, genzo-e, right? That stuff doesn't happen in a local temple. So North American temples are a bit of a hybrid, right? We're kind of cherry picking, right? We like to do some of the more intensive things, but we're also a group of householding people that need just spiritual care. So those two things kind of come together. Okay, so international temples like Sanshin are sort of part of that thing. It's a weird hybrid. There is an actual designation for a recognized overseas temple, which we are. Tokubetsu temples, or special temples, right, are the temples that are overseas. So we're completely authorized, but we're not in Japan, which also interestingly means that the clergy who run international temples, we're missionaries. Because we're bringing something from Japan, so we're actually missionaries, which I think is really interesting. We're designated that way. Overseas teachers. Okay, so parallel with having these two founders, we talked about Dogen and Keizan. So parallel with having these two founders, we've also got two head temples. Eheiji is Dogen's place, and Sojiji is Keizan's place. So Eheiji is founded in 1244 by Dogen. So that's about 9 years before he dies, because he dies in 1253. So 1244, Eheiji is still active today. It's got 100 or 200 training monks there. If you go there and you walk around, you will see them moving from place to place. The original Sojiji was founded in 1321, so roughly the same time, by Keizan in Ishikawa. Unfortunately, it burns down. So the Sojiji, in the late 19th century, it burns down. So the Sojiji we visit today is not the original Sojiji. It moved to Yokohama and was rebuilt and restarted, and that's where it is today. So if you're going to Eheiji and you're going to Sojiji, it's not the original Sojiji, which is okay. So you can go to these temples as a tourist. You cannot sort of just call up and say, can I drop in for zazen? Doesn't happen that way. You actually, if you're going to train there, you have to register, and enroll, and and go through that. But you can go and walk the grounds. You can look around. There are things to see. You can do guided tours. There are programs for company employees and youth groups and visitors, and if you want to sign up to do something more intensive, you can do that, but you need to make a plan. Because of course the point of those temples is to train novices how to be clergy and run temples. So that's their kind of #1 priority. But there are ways to go and be a visitor. So if you're in Japan and you want to see where did Dogen train, where did Keizan practice, you can certainly do that. Larger temples in this system sometimes have sub-temples. They may not even be in the same place, but they're affiliated. So we have this sort of core satellite thing going on. There's a temple and it has some sub-temples. So there's a connection usually, but different people may be running them. They may not be in the same place. So interestingly, here's Eheiji. It's Dogen's place. Dogen is centralized, right? We look to Dogen for everything we're going to do, as opposed to Sojiji. Historically, it has always had fewer sub-temples than Sojiji. So Eheiji, so we consider that Eheiji is the head of Dharma lineages, and Sojiji is sometimes said to be the head of temple lineages. So out of those 15,000 temples, Soto Zen temples, Eheiji has 150. And they're tiny little, they're not, like well-known big temples. They're up in the north, right? They're kind of obscure. So interestingly, it's like, how did that happen? But I think it is some testament to how, here's Keizan, he's spreading the teachings, man. He's got Sojiji out there. He's going, sharing Dharma with people and building the community. And he's got lots and lots of sub-temples for Sojiji. And Eheiji has 150. So anyway, it's kind of one of those interesting quirks of history. Okay, so one of Soto Shu's key terms you may know is Ichibutsu Ryo-so, one Buddha, two founders. Ichibutsu Ryo-so. So if you go into a Soto...
Who said that?
Pardon me?
Who said that?
That's a main, sort of a key term within Soto Shu. It's not something we attribute to a person, but it's sort of an important key tenet. Ichibutsu Ryo-so, one Buddha, two founders. So if you go into a Soto Zen temple, and you look at the altar, or you go to somebody's house, a Soto Zen person's house, and they have a home altar, the figure, the thing at the center of that is Shakyamuni. Because we know there's multiple ways to represent Buddha, there's lots of bodhisattvas, there's all kinds of things it could be. In this tradition, it is Shakyamuni. It is this guy, right? Not for a Senmon Soto. For Senmon Soto, it's Manjushri. We talked about that last time, right? But if you go into the Dharma hall, into the Hatto, that is Shakyamuni. So we have Shakyamuni as the one Buddha, we have Dogen and Keizan as the two founders. These three entities are what make up Ichibutsu Ryo-so. So having one Buddha, two founders, two head temples at the center of this thing is the result of a whole lot of compromises over many, many years that allowed Soto Shu as an institution to kind of hang together. Because believe it or not, there was controversy about what should be at the middle of this thing. For us now, we look at that and go, well, that's a no-brainer. Of course it's Buddha, of course it's Shakyamuni, and of course it's Dogen, and maybe we know enough to say, yeah, it's Keizan too, right? We look at that and go, yeah, of course. Well, no, it was a big controversy. In the late 19th century, for a variety of reasons, which we don't have time to talk about, Soto Zen had to describe itself. All the Japanese Buddhist schools did, but Soto Zen had to describe itself. It had to have a name, describe the tradition, who were its founders, where were its head temples, what was the object of worship, what was the main doctrine, right? So the government actually wanted to know these things, but it needed to be able to articulate a brand, is the way I would put it today, right? Interestingly, all of that exercise has had a major impact on the way we practice here. This is why this part of the story is important for us. So I encourage you to dig into that. It's really interesting, but it also, why do we centralize certain things? It's because of this whole big branding exercise, right? It's a huge, complex story. However, when it comes to designating founders, Soto Zen leaders at the time could not even agree that Shakyamuni needed to be in the middle. And when I first learned that, I went, what? There was even an argument about Buddha. So there was one argument that said, well, Buddha nature is already everywhere, so we shouldn't be looking to something outside of that and venerating something outside of that as a separate Buddha, so it shouldn't be Shakyamuni. There's another line of thought that says, well, the three treasures are what's really important because we take refuge in all three treasures, so we shouldn't just single out Shakyamuni and put him in the middle. So no, it shouldn't be Shakyamuni. Another line of thought says, well, within three bodies of Buddha, which I think we've talked about here, we talked about three treasures. So Buddha is the Shakyamuni is the manifest, I'm sorry, the manifesting version, the Nirmanakaya, right? Which is kind of the lowest form, because we kind of look at the other ones and go, oh, those are abstract and important and big, and right, and this was just a guy, right? So it certainly shouldn't be him. He's the most, that would be the most inferior form of Buddha, so he shouldn't be at the beginning, be at the middle, right? So what are you going to do? You've got all of this going on. So of course, in the midst of a reform movement, what are you going to do? They look to Dogen and they say, what did Dogen say? And that's how we're going to decide. Well, Dogen had taught there is no founder other than Shakyamuni. Because, of course, Dogen never said, I'm starting out to form my own sect. I'm going to make this thing called Soto Zen. He just said, no, I am teaching real authentic transmission, right? I'm teaching the real authentic Buddhism that started with Shakyamuni and came down the line to me, and here we are. So he's just saying the only Buddhism is just the authentic transmission of the Dharma, right? So if we are thinking that there is some founder other than Shakyamuni, then we're separating ourselves from Buddha and from the practice and from the Buddha way, and it felt to him like a child might separate itself from its parents and then sort of wander around without any resources. He says, we don't want to do that. Shakyamuni was the only founder. So now we have Buddha in the center. We know why we have Shakyamuni. What about Keizan and what about Dogen? Well, Eheiji, of course, has been very careful to curate a particular story or position or brand or image of Dogen, right? in order to safeguard its own legitimacy. Because, right, if Dogen is the arbiter, if Dogen is the authority, and Eheiji is the keeper of that tradition, then of course Eheiji is important. Eheiji wins. So, wants to keep its position. This is a very real problem in its rivalry over centuries with Sojiji. So we might want to think, oh, Soto Zen, everything's very peaceful, everyone gets along. There's been a fair amount of jockeying for position amongst people in temples, right, over the course of time. So by 1589, the imperial court has recognized Sojiji as the head temple, right, over Eheiji. 26 years later, 1615, the shogun decides, now we've gone from the emperor to the shogun decides Eheiji rules are the house rules because of Dogen, right? So what Eheiji says goes for everybody. Now, Sojiji's not so happy because, you know, this is a victory over Sojiji. So we see how these things go back and forth. So these two temples stay rivals for the support of the emperor. By the time of the Meiji Restoration, finally, they've reached a truce. They figured out how to coexist, how to sort of give and take. Everyone agrees at this point that Soto school followed the maxims of the founding patriarch Dogen and the aspirations of the late teacher Keizan. So this is, you can see again, we're pointing back to the wisdom of Dogen, the teachings of Dogen, internal, and the aspirations of Keizan to share this with people. Right? So again, we've reached this compromise. Again, of course, they're completely interpenetrated. They're completely consistent with each other so that we can have one community. So this is a pattern, at least in my mind, that I frequently see, or that we frequently see in Soto Shu history. From about the 18th century reform movement onward, I think it's why things today sometimes look to us like paradox. We'll see a guideline, a teaching, something over here, and when we look over here, it's being completely ignored with kind of a wink and a smile. How do we hold these two things? I mean, in my experience, Soto Shu is really good at holding two truths and keeping the peace, right? Allowing things to coexist. We've talked about it with relation to Nyoho. We're not supposed to wear black and white, and how much black do we wear? And we just go, yeah, yeah. You know, it's not a Nyoho color, and yet. So somehow these things, I think, coexist. So often, here's the official line, but in reality, yeah, do what you want, and we're kind of not going to say anything. It happens all the time. So it can be frustrating for North Americans because sometimes we'll say, just tell us, what's the thing? What's the rule? What's the guideline? What am I allowed to do? Well, indirect, well, right? It's about keeping the peace.